what are the attributes that people should feel and be exhibiting from a leadership perspective? What are the things that you think are absolutely key and critical?
Well, there's so many, aren't there? I mean, integrity, humility, you have to be resilient, accountability, honesty, competence, all of those are in the melting pot. Somebody quite recently described to me leadership as doing the right thing. Leading a big formation aerobatic team is a very privileged position, but there are very few other jobs I can think of that if the leader makes a big mistake, he's going to kill everybody. And the guys who are flying on your wing do not look in the cockpit at all. They don't look at their speed, their height, their attitude. They're just looking at the leader. And if you're looping and rolling or you're upside down, and sometimes you're flying really quite low, so you're in the bottom of the bottom here, and you're looking up, and you've got trees whistling past your ear, but you can't look out because you have to look at him. You really have to trust that guy. By definition, we were very close. We were flying 4 or 5 feet away from each other, so you had to trust people implicitly.
And at what speeds were you flying 5 feet from each other, Tim?
In miles an hour, we're doing about 400 miles an hour, sometimes a bit more.
Welcome to the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Hi, everybody. It's Barry Eustance here from the Success Just Great People podcast. You may remember a little while ago, we did a podcast with Steve Johnson, who is with the synchro pair with the Red Arrows, the Royal Air Force's aerobatic team. He mentioned great leaders. And in that conversation, he mentioned Tim Miller, who was the team leader when Steve was on the team. And I couldn't be happier to introduce my friend, colleague of over 25 years, Tim Miller, the very same Tim Miller that Steve Johnson was referring to. Tim, welcome to the Just Great People podcast.
Thanks very much, Barry.
I didn't mean to bounce you, Tim, but as you know, as we've discussed, this is about ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. And I think it'd be fair to say that your story has got some significant elements of extraordinary in it. Just a little bit of background from your time as a boy in Northern Ireland to leading the Red Arrows, becoming a senior training captain in the Virgin Atlantic, director of displays throughout the country. It's a pretty stellar story. And how did it start there and end up here? What was the story?
Well, it's quite extraordinary, really, because when I went to school, I had no interest in aviation at all. In fact, I never even had read a Biggles book. And a very good friend of mine I used to play a lot of golf with said, there's an air show on a Saturday, a place called New Nards in Northern Ireland. And I remember he really wanted to go. I remember saying to him, Thomas, I'm not really that interested in aeroplanes. Let's go and play golf. He said, no, come on, let's go. Anyway, he dragged me along to this. Just as we were parking our car, this lightning that had been displaying there came in very low and rotated and lit the afterburners. And the earth literally did shake. And I thought,
Yes,
that is quite cool. And then we watched other airplanes doing their bit. And at the end, the Red Arrows came, and they were pretty early days of the Red Arrows. I mean, it must have been, I don't know, 71, 72, that had been going for 5 or 6 years. They came in very low behind a crowd. And I thought, now that is really cool. And the next day, it was the Sunday Times color supplement, first ever publication. So that's how old I am. And on the back of that for years, there was, you too can be a fighter pilot. And I just thought, well, I'll just fill this in. I was only 18 at the time. And I filled it in for a bit of a laugh, really, posted it off. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I got an invite to go to Biggin Hill to go through the interview. And that was it. And it's about a 5-day interview, I think, Biggin Hill. First day being medical, and half the people who arrived were chucked out from that. And second day I was still there, and then they do a sort of leadership exercise stuff, and the numbers dwindled every day, and amazingly they selected me. To this day,
And you were left standing at the end.
so yeah, I mean, I wasn't a sort of airfix nerd at all. I just sort of fell into it, and I'm very glad I went to that air show, because I've had a very fun career because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you went through the training process, the primary training, basic training, and weapons training with the Air Force, you then went on to squadrons. And what were you flying initially, Tim?
Well, I was very lucky. I flew the Harrier, which was the shiny aeroplane of that era. No, I was just lucky. I happened to get on to the Harrier in the pretty early days. I was flying the Harrier when I was 22, 23. I was even luckier. I was displaying it when I was 24, 25, when I was in Germany. So the amount of responsibility I was given at a very, very early age was nearly unthinkable now, because you need a degree to join as a pilot. So that's going to take 3 or 4 years out of your early days, and training. There's big gaps in the training at the moment. So, a lot of flying Typhoons and F-35s aren't really getting operational until their late 20s. And I was operational in the Harrier squadron at 22.
And
So
there's also a question, isn't there? How do you go from that to being selected for the Red Arrows? Because I asked Steve Johnson, Joss, the same question, and it's a very interesting transition, isn't it, from squadron pilot to member of the Red Arrows, the Reds.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, all the Red Arrow pilots are ex-fighter pilots, and the selection process, I think Joss explained it very well to you before, so I won't harp on about that. But it is, you have to have been probably flying fast jets for a couple of tours. You're probably going to be your late 20s by then. You have to have demonstrated that your flying ability is reasonable. And the big thing is your face has to fit. That was the interesting part. That the team was very, very close knit community. Anybody who was a bit of a prima donna, we just didn't want at all. And the selection process was such that anybody in the team could veto somebody. And it worked really well. The selection process went well. Yet we have a couple of bad eggs? Very few over the years. One or two people perhaps shouldn't have been selected, but on the whole, I think the selection process was.
It parallels with the selection process that you and I went through with our previous airline operator, where they were looking not so much at the technical skill, but actually the non-technical skills, the ability to get on, the inherent leadership skills that people brought to the organization, the ability to sit on a flight deck, in that case, for 14 hours as you trundle your way gently to Hong Kong. A similar process there, wasn't it, in the Red Arrows, the ability to actually be a part of a team.
Yeah, very much so. By definition, we were very close. I mean, we were flying 4 or 5 feet away from each other. So you had to trust people implicitly.
Yeah, and at what speeds were you flying 5 feet from each other, Tim?
Well, I mean, yeah, in miles an hour, we're doing about 400 miles an hour, sometimes a bit more. But your relative speed to each other, of course, is zero, unless you're doing some wacky maneuvers. But it was, an awful lot of practice went involved in it. But the selection process was about a week, and we looked at about 90 people. We whittled that down to about 9. We interviewed about 9, and we selected 3. And by the time we got down to 9, all of those people certainly had the ability of doing the job. It was really down to personality, how they're going to fit in. And then we had a sort of voting system amongst the team. Only the 9 pilots, nobody else, no other senior officers were involved, because they weren't the ones who had to fly with these guys. So we closed the door. Team leader of the day would say, "What do we think of so and so?" And that was the way it was done.
And what was the season that you joined the Reds in, Tim?
I did. I was very lucky. I did 6 years on the team, so I did three years as part of the team. Then I went back and I flew the Harrier for 3 years. And then, much to my surprise and delight, I was selected to be the leader for another 3 years. Yeah, I was unbelievably lucky.
And how old were you when you became a leader of the Red Arrows? Tim, what was
I
your age
was
then?
34 and a half. Right?
The half is very important, or less so now. Yeah, I mean that's really relevant, isn't it? I mean, at 22, you're whizzing around in Harriers, doing all sorts of amazing things, and at 34, you're leader of the Red Arrows. That then brings us to another element, which we'll sort of feed back to. For a lot of people here, there's a bit of mystery about flying airplanes, but actually, one of the key things that I'm very very interested in developing when I talk to my guests is the leadership element of how all this works and what the crossover is to people who might be listening to this podcast who've never flown an airplane, so aspire to or currently leaders. What are your thoughts in terms of what are the attributes that people should feel and be exhibiting from a leadership perspective? What are the things that you think are absolutely key and critical?
There's so many, aren't there? I mean, integrity, humility. You have to be quite resilient. That's accountability, honesty, competence. All of those are in the melting pot. I think it's quite interesting. I believe there is a subtle difference between management and leadership, and I think somebody quite recently described to me leadership as doing the right thing, whereas management is sort of achieving the task, and they're two quite different things. I think leading a big formation aerobatic team is a very privileged position, but there are very few other jobs I can think of that if the leader makes a big mistake, he's going to kill everybody. And whereas if you're, I don't know, if you're accounts manager of a big supermarket and you make a mistake, then you're not going to kill anybody. So you might move the bottom line a little bit and you might upset some of the people who work for you, but you're not going to kill anybody. Because what people don't realize is that the guys who are flying on your wing do not look in the cockpit at all. They don't look at their speed, their height, their attitude. They're just looking at the leader. And if you're looping and rolling or you're upside down, and sometimes you're flying really quite low. And I remember when I was led by a guy called John Blackwell, who was excellent, and I trusted him implicitly because sometimes you're in the bottom of the bottom man here, and you're looking up, and you've got trees whistling past your ear, but you can't look out because you have to look at him. You really have to trust that guy. So yeah, I mean it's a different type of leadership, but obviously being a leader, you have to demonstrate that you are capable of doing this and build up the trust. And you're in a very privileged position.
And that trust and integrity were two things that you mentioned earlier on. And it seems to be a common theme. In fact, in the Leadership Challenge, Guzes and Posner book, when they do the millions of data points, integrity, honesty, and integrity comes very high up in the qualifying criteria from people's perspective, i.e., people who are looking to leaders, and as the qualities of leaders. When you left, and we'll come back to the airline industry in a minute, but when you left the flying environment, doing the commercial stuff in the civilian context and in the civilian management and leadership context, did you find a fundamental difference? What were the differences that you identified that took you back or were noteworthy from your perspective?
Well, I think there are quite a lot of similarities. I think that, as you know yourself, because you've been there as an experienced captain, captaincy is to do with leadership as well. You want to build your team around you. You want everybody to trust you. I think it's important that you when things go wrong. In the old days, when things went wrong, the captain was the captain, and that was it. And of course, now with CRM and all the rest of it, we know that quite often the best ideas come from the junior people. So
absolutely.
And I think to be a good airline captain, you need to be a good leader as well.
And an acronym check there for our dear listener and viewers. CRM stands for Crew Resource Management, which is, in fact, I'll let Tim explain it, because Tim mentioned the word CRM. It's really, really important in the airline industry because it really does help maintain the safety culture of the industry. But Tim, over to you. A quick précis on CRM, what it means and why it's important. You start for 10, no pauses.
I think the history of it really started from a tragic accident at Staines, which a Trident crashed just after takeoff out of Heathrow. And when they looked at all the black boxes and everything else, what happened was the captain, who was a very autocratic senior training captain, nobody liked, and he wouldn't take any criticism or suggestions from anybody. And he had a heart attack just after the aeroplane got airborne. The first officer sat there, apparently watched this happen. He was too terrified to take control until it was too late and the aeroplane crashed. And when everybody looked into this, suddenly realized that the sort of atmosphere in flight decks had to change. So, a little bit like in an operating theatre as well, when the surgeon was God, and a lot of people might be frightened of saying, actually, maybe we should count all the scalpels and all the rest of it. But back to airline flying, it was very much the idea was that the captain was not God. The captain was the more experienced person, but to include the first officer or first officers at the time. And as you know, when things go wrong, taking advice, accepting advice is really important. At the end of the day, the captain will have the last say, obviously. And I think that was probably the best thing that ever happened to airline flying. Before that, it was, well, you and I are too young to remember, but apparently it was
Yes. Thank you, Tim.
a good place. Now, culturally, of course, some other parts of the world, this doesn't work as well. And they definitely need to work on that. But I think European countries in particular, North America, I think the airline training is exceptional, actually.
And I think the safety statistics actually support the case that where cultural issues create a cross cockpit authority gradient that's too steep, i.e. the captain is too autocratic, the safety statistics are poorer in those environments, and there have been significant efforts to redress that. And it is relevant. The crossover, talking about the medical profession, our previous employer had people from the medical profession coming into the simulator to see how our CRM, crew resource management, worked, how our checklists worked, how we did things, because that was at that stage really quite new to the medical industry, and I think is now much more mainstream, Tim, I understand.
It is. I've got a good friend who's a consultant anaesthetist, and before 9/11, I took him on a couple of flights, and he saw my working environment. And then he took me into an operating theatre, and I was amazed how many similarities there were between what we do in a flight deck and checklists and procedures and what they do in an operating theatre, which is good to see.
And pulling that further into the more corporate environment, and a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, won't all be aspiring formation aerobatic pilots, but will be more in line with commercial jobs and commercial leadership. What are the things that we can bring into the conversation about leadership? We see a paucity, in my judgment, of ethics and doing the right thing on a global basis at the moment. That's my own view, and I think we're suffering for it. So you're starting out, you're 18 years of age, 20 years of age, very keen to get on in life and in the corporate or in the entrepreneurial environment. What are the leadership traits that we should be encouraging people to focus on, the things to demonstrate, the CRM elements of teamwork and leadership, Tim?
Well, I think we've sort of said it before: integrity, humility. You have to be resilient. You have to accept taking a lot of knocks. You have to accept, certainly in aviation, as you know, you have to accept being criticized all the time. And certainly in the Air Force, early days, I mean, every single trip you'd be criticized to be something that wasn't perfect. And I think that's really important. You have to learn to take it on the chin and learn from that. The people who think they know everything, in my view, are never going to do that well. After 46 years of flying, when I did my last trip, I certainly didn't admit to knowing it all. I knew quite a lot, but I certainly didn't know it all. And I think that the humility side of it is so important that, to be a good leader, you have to accept that you need to take advice as well and accept that advice. And it's
And
not,
perceive that as a positive.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And admitting to your mistakes. I mean, we all make mistakes. And obviously, when you're leading an aerobatic team, for instance, you can't make major mistakes because you will kill people. I'll give you an example. When you pull up into a loop, for instance, with 9 to 8 other hanging on to you, if you're 10 knots slow, if you're by yourself, that doesn't matter at all. If you are leading another 8 aeroplanes, they will know over the top of the loop that you are just a couple of knots slow because they will feel it, because there might be 2, 3, 4 aeroplanes out. Now, in the debrief, I used to always say, okay, the Apollo loop, I was 10 knots slow. And they will go, yeah, well, we felt that. But just to say nothing, I don't think it's very good for your credibility. And I think to admit to your mistakes is really important. And I think that's
And to
where
accept
you get
criticism.
people.
And to accept criticism. It was something that Joss mentioned, and is so important, that actually criticism is such a constructive thing, and should be constructive, perceived as constructive, and acted upon constructively.
Yeah, I mean, when we had visitors to come and watch a debrief, a display practice, a brief and then a display practice debrief, they were in the debrief, shocked is probably putting it too strongly, but could not believe how tough we were on each other. You know, we'd stop the video at Diamond Bend, and something that the crowd would see for 2 or 3 seconds, we might spend 10 or 15 minutes over saying 2 you're long, 3 you're short, 4 you're wide. And, we were tough on each other, but to get really good, you have to A, keep practicing a lot, and B, accept the criticism, but far more importantly, do something about it. But no, I mean, the leader is certainly not God. I used to always, hopefully, admit to mistakes. Now, Joss, you were talking about earlier on. Joss is a very good mate. He was a brilliant number 6, exceptional pilot. And I remember once we were displaying at Cows, and it was hazy conditions and therefore quite difficult to see datum. And halfway through the display, we used to split off the synchro pair. And it was hazy and it was very difficult for me to see. But I spat him off about 30 degrees off the right heading. And you don't have time to say, I'm really sorry, Joss, but I've screwed up here and you're on the wrong heading. I just said to him, 6 check heading. And he was able enough to sort that out. And I did buy him a beer at the end of the day. There's an example of,
Yeah.
we're not all perfect. And yes, I made a mistake. It wasn't a dangerous mistake, but I just didn't get the angles quite right. There were mitigating circumstances, bad visibility and a strong wind. But it's really important to admit to those things.
Yeah, and it's very, very deeply embedded in the airline culture that self-effacing, self-criticizing without beating yourself up, that actually saying, look, mistakes happen, we're going to fix it so it doesn't happen a second time. And I think that's something that I think culturally may not be universally translated in the commercial environment, where people feel defensive when in fact the critique is something that can be really, really powerful in moving the puck forward to where it needs to be. I remember someone telling me, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And that person was, well, yes, but that was you actually, Tim, in a sim debriefing when we're talking about practice to me. And I thought, it's not great, because there's Tim here, training captain, formerly with Red Arrows, demonstrating clearly that you've just got to keep doing this stuff until you get it right. You practice until you get it right, and then you practice until you can't get it wrong. And then when you do get it wrong, or if you get it wrong, you do something about it, and have the strength to accept that constructively. And I think that's all part of the integrity and honesty bit that we're discussing. So, Tim, after you left the Reds, you then moved to long haul flying and being director of displays, and also involved with high performance vehicles in the commercial sense. Have you found anything that's outside of the airline flying environment that is as stimulating, or what's the story?
Well, I don't know. I was very spoiled. I mean, it's very difficult I don't think I'll ever find anything as exciting as flying a Harrier at low level, or indeed leading the Red Arrows. It doesn't get a lot more exciting than that. But I really enjoyed my airline flying. It was very different. I was very lucky. I mean, I sort of fell into running air displays when, just after I joined Virgin, in fact, I was approached by, well, actually Lord March of Goodwood, name dropping for a second. Would I be interested in running the Goodwood Festival Speed air display? And yeah, I mean, I did that for 25 years, and I ran other displays around the country. And that was fun, but that was a different sort of leadership skill. I was more of a manager than a leader, because I was putting all the bits and pieces together and marrying aeroplanes to pilots and making sure that everybody flew to the right regulations. And yeah, it was an interesting management exercise, but at least I had hopefully a little bit of credibility when I was briefing various display pilots, the do's and the don'ts on this particular display site, the rules and regulations, and yeah, it worked really well. And I did it alongside my airline flight.
Tim, it's like the 10-second question thing, so I'll prepare you now. It's a really simple question. Right now, you're sitting at a dining table with someone who's full of beans, full of enthusiasm, full of ambition, and they want to do great things. What would be your considered guidance and pearls of wisdom that you'd pass on to that young and enthusiastic and ambitious person?
Well, I think the two words you've mentioned, and ambition, are really important. I mean, once I thought I could perhaps fly aeroplanes, then I wanted to go up the greasy pole. I joined the Air Force. I wanted to fly fighters, and when I knew I could fly fighters, I wanted to fly the Harrier. When I flew the Harrier, I really wanted to get on the Red Arrows. So yes, was I ambitious? Probably quite ambitious. I think you have to believe in yourself. And for youngsters, just don't put any hurdles in the way. If you really want to do something, go for it. I mean, eventually there will be hurdles put in the way, and you will fail at various stages, but believe in yourself and be ambitious. And there's a fair amount of grit involved as well. I think the flighters who expect everything to be put on a plate for them and the state to look after them will not do very well in life, because they've got no ambition and no sort of drive. But there are millions of young people out there with ambition and drive, and my advice is, yeah, go for it.
And from the same person who gave Tim the more I practice, the luckier I get, the great Gary Player also said, it's not whether you face adversity, but how you deal with it. Tim, we've covered honesty, integrity, ambition, drive, being a servant leader, creating teamwork, and doing the right thing. And I think for anybody who is contemplating leadership in any capacity, context, or environment, that's pretty good guidance from someone who's done it in bucket loads. Tim Miller, thank you so much for joining us on the Just Great People podcast. We look forward to seeing you again, Tim, very, very soon.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for listening to our Just Great People podcast. And you can really help us. Please do remember to like and subscribe, and please share this podcast with everybody you know. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Success Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time, and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.